Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and as always, the yang to my yin, Susan Hobson's here. Susan, how are you?
I am excellent. I'm fabulous. I'm so fired up for our guest today. He's got one of the best entrepreneurial stories I've heard in a long time, and I can hardly wait to share it with our audience. So, yeah. How are you feeling, buddy? I know we're on this fresh, clean slate of ice here in 2024. I'll throw that back at you. How are you feeling today?
Yeah, totally. And for a lot of folks, maybe you knew that I was hitting a little bit of a wall there in December with some burnout. And Susan and my therapist were basically like reminding me to take vacation. And so my wife and I we went and explored a little bit of Costa Rica the last week or so. So we climbed part of Mount Cherripo. Of course, the whole journey takes 2 days. We only did a couple hours. um, we also went and saw Nayaca waterfalls, which is it's one of the most popular waterfalls in Costa Rica. We jumped off a cliff and did some paragliding, which is, for someone who is afraid of heights, was wildly not scary. The scariest part was actually looking over the edge in the first place. But then when the guy tells you to just like run and jump, it's like that athlete, like I'm just going and here we go. Um, yeah. And then we went horseback riding as well. And so we'd done some fun stuff. It really helped me feel a lot more energetic and ready to rumble. And so, yeah, we're back in action.
Tell our people, for all of those people out there listening right now who are also in the process of trying to recover from Q4 burnout, what is the method to that madness? Like getting out and doing these wildly exponential, wildly adventurous things that you just described. How does that actually help us from a recovery standpoint?
Yeah, and so here's the tip, right? And Sunny Strasberg is my therapist now, and she said to me, she's like, she works with some folks who are billionaires, and she's like, billionaires put the tech down and do fun stuff. And it's like, yes, they have privilege in a sense of like money and they can create time to do these things, but they're also incredibly busy folks that have tons, basically unlimited things that they could do from a work perspective that, they're running multiple businesses or they have investments or blah, blah, blah. Like they have unlimited things that they could be doing. But the big piece of this, right, is this element of being able to do fun things and play like kind of like a kid, because it unlocks the ability for you to see and create and innovate when you're not sitting in front of a computer. And so that's a big thing for me, and something that I coach my clients to do is when you wake up in the morning, do not pick up your phone immediately. Is like have a coffee or walk your dog or spend 5, 10, like I give away basically usually a 6-minute meditation. It's like do something that is pre that so you can set up your day for success. And also for the folks out there who read all those entrepreneur pieces, you don't need 3 hours to do this. You don't have to get up and run and do a cold bath and meditate for an hour. And like you need like literally 15 minutes and you can do this to set up your day.
Miracle morning routine, right? Yeah, something about getting out of your environment and getting all that new stimulus into the brain really is what's required, right? To regain the resources, to regain a fresh perspective. So, obviously, as athletes, we understood this. We didn't play 60 minutes on the ice in perpetuity. We went to the bench and we got the water and we took a break, right? Because that's how we recover all of those resources. So great reminder, Rob. Those pictures of you or that video of you running off the side of a cliff, I will never forget.
Uh, yeah.
Is that
And one
a is
thing I
that a
just,
metaphor for this year, do you think?
so for me, it's very much about sort of coming back to self. And it's doing these things that are yeah, just more fun or more adventurous or more risk taking that I wouldn't have done before. And I think it's that level of self trust that I've created that makes these things feel safer. Now, just last thing before we get to our incredible guest, right? Is future guest of the show, but also the host of the Unlock Moment show, Dr. Gary Crotaz has a quote where he says, "How do hamsters get off the wheel? They get off." They just choose to get off the wheel. And you, regardless of how much stuff you could be doing or have to do or should do, you can also choose to get off the wheel. It's a choice. You have to make that choice as an adult who's leading themselves. And so sometimes it's helpful to have a reminder, of course, that's why you have folks around you, but make that choice. Now, of course, we got an incredible special guest to kick off 2024, but somebody who's also, and I'm going to say this because it's amazing, you have gamer dad in your LinkedIn. And so someone who knows the value of play and how that can lead to incredible, innovative, and creative ideas. Graeme Barlow's with us. He's a 4-time entrepreneur. He's the CEO at Iversoft. Graeme, first off, how are you?
I'm doing well, Rob. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to hear the journey you guys have been through and excited to kind of kick off the year with you. I also love your story just now of like when you're looking at the paragliding and it's like that fear is immense before you're doing it. You're looking over the cliff, but then you hit a moment where you just kind of choose action and you go. Like to me, that's so indicative of a lot of the conversations many of us have around entrepreneurship is you talk to so many people. The fear of starting is huge. When you're looking off that cliff and you're like, oh, like there's going to be all these problems, there's going to be all these challenges, there's going to be all these hurdles. I don't know. But then when you take that first step, when you jump off and you just start going, that's when you start figuring it out, finding answers, making it happen. But a lot of people get stuck and never jump off the cliff. So I'm proud of you for jumping off the cliff. That's awesome.
So Graeme, how do you coach or how do you talk to folks who are scared to take that leap?
A lot of it comes down to just talking about what are people envisioning that is the worst case scenario, right? Like a lot of the times we invent this entire ecosystem in our head of like, oh, our friends will be disappointed in us, our family will be embarrassed, I'll fail, I'll like all of these things are reasons why they can't, or like I won't make as much money, or nobody will buy from me. Like there's so many reasons people can come up with to not do something. And at the end of the day, you kind of have to just walk through those and talk through each of them and at some point make a decision. And a lot of the people I work with, that first decision is just start. Like you don't have to all in on day one, but just start. Talk to a customer, talk to a partner, put it out there what you want to build and take that first step because you don't build large companies, you don't build success in a 30-second sprint. You build it one step at a time over a significant amount of time. And the most important thing is you take the first step, take another one, and just don't stop taking those actions. We talk about kind of habit development that compounds over time. I literally had this call this morning with someone that's launching a new company and they're like, I don't know, like I'm going to have to get customers. I was like, cool. From this day on until the next time you and I talk, you are going to message 5 outbound customers every day. Find them on Twitter, find them on Instagram, find them on LinkedIn, whatever. 5 a day. That's it. That's your job. 5 messages. And he's like, oh, I don't know. That feels like a lot, but also not a lot. And it's like, you know what? You do that for a month straight, you will have either a really good sense of where your product fits in the market, or you'll have some customers. And you just do that. And it's little actions like that can compound over time. So I feel like a lot of the times it's finding those steps that people can take that help you overcome that fear of, I don't know what to do next, or I'm stuck in this behavior, I'm stuck in the model. It's not always as dramatic as jumping off a cliff with a paraglider, because that's kind of intense as someone who is equally petrified of heights. But yeah, it's those little steps we can take in those little habits.
It's such a great reminder for us older folks, right? I feel like the older we get, the more we experience the fear and the resistance, right? Because the more our ecosystem is populated with all the reasons why that potential thing will not work out. But I think this is also why we love the childlike state, and why in NLP we say it's the most resourceful state of them all, because kids, they don't have any of that populating their ecosystem yet. It makes it so much easier for them to go from, right, crazy, radical, adventurous idea to running off the side of that cliff. So this brings me to your story, sir. And that's where my curiosity naturally wants to take us next, right? Because you were actually so young when you decided to take those first initial steps on your entrepreneurial journey, right? I'm curious, did you have that fear? Do you remember having to tackle any of that? You were so young. Tell our folks about your story, Graeme. It's phenomenal.
I appreciate that. It's funny. I think a lot of that theme is going to be a bit of the kind of naive innocence we have early on. And one of those things you have to hang on to is that optimism and almost lack of understanding of all the things that could go wrong or reasons why it shouldn't work. And you just kind of do it to make it work. So like as you alluded to a little bit, I got started in entrepreneurship very, very, very early. When I was 10 years old, I was obsessed with online gaming. Like that was my world. I spent all of my time online. This is a future podcast thing we can go into. But like coming from a fairly abusive household and a tough kind of upbringing, online internet world was my salvation. It's where I put all my time. And I hit a point where I was kind of at conflict with my parents of like, there's no value in you spending all your time in video games. This makes no sense. Where's the value here? And that pushed me a little bit to look at like, okay, well, is there value? Can we sell some of these things from these games online? I kind of stumbled into the fact that people were buying items on eBay at the time. And over the course of time, we just started selling items that myself and a couple of friends that I had, we would find items, we would sell them on eBay, we would make a couple $100, and we were able to kind of go back to our parents and be like, see, gaming's not a waste of time. I made $1,000. And that kind of evolved into like, well, it kind of sucks to sell everything we find, because then why are we playing? This feels like a job. And so that evolved into like, well, what if we could build some really basic tools that would play the game for us? So we built really basic bots that played games like Diablo 1, Diablo 2, Neopets Flash games, and built a little bit of automation so that then programs were finding everything for us and we were selling that. That evolved into building really basic bots on World of Warcraft, and moving off of eBay for selling everything and onto wholesaling to other websites that were then selling it back to consumers. And we did that for the course of about 6 years and scaled it up across a dozen games. And that was kind of my first personal venture into the world of kind of entrepreneurship. But I didn't know what the word entrepreneurship was. We never incorporated a company. Everything was kind of like a bunch of friends online with PayPal accounts. We were kids. And nobody told us it couldn't be done. We just kind of did it. And each step, we just did more of it. And if I look back at a lot of my career, a lot of the coolest things I've been able to do have come from a bit of the mindset of like, I don't know that I shouldn't be able to do it, so I did it. And now look back on it, like after we ended up selling that company in 2006 to a Chinese company because it was getting very litigious and very weird to be in that space in North America. So we got out of it. And a few years later, I started a game development company in Ottawa with a couple other founders. And it was my first ever experience raising angel funding and trying to raise capital for a company. And with a pretty basic deck that I look back on now and I'm like, ooh, that's not the best. We raised $600,000 in a month and a half. Anyone I talked to in the fundraising world now is like, that's not possible. You can't do that. I was like, I don't know. All I knew at the time was like Zuckerberg is crazy. Silicon Valley, everything goes fast. So Here we go. It should take a few weeks and we'll go. And it did. And so a lot of that philosophy, and like I was 21 at the time, a lot of that philosophy comes from just not letting yourself get absorbed in the philosophy that like it's not possible, or 8 people who haven't done it are trying to tell you that it can't be done. It's like, I think too often as entrepreneurs, as founders, as human beings, we allow people who haven't done the thing we want to do to weigh in and give us advice or give us feedback that frames our mindset on something. Like if you're not talking to someone that has exceeded where you're trying to go, they shouldn't be weighing in on how possible, feasible, or realistic the thing is that you're doing. And I think to me, that's been a huge theme looking back of like, I didn't know any better, so I just did it. And it's also something I find I check myself now on of like, am I letting too much information hold me back from decisions that I want to make, or like risks we're going to take, or places we're going to invest? I think we make better choices now than I did 20 years ago and had no idea what the hell I was doing. But I also think you balance that a little bit with like the innocence of like, I don't know, just do it and kind of figure it out. So yeah, that was kind of my entrepreneurial start, was super young and like super cowboy nonsense on the internet. And then yeah, I built a game development company called Rocket Owl. We raised about 3 million from angels over the course of a number of years, grew it over 1 million users, ended up selling it to an investment group here in Ottawa. After that, I spent 3 years investing in early stage companies with a small venture fund. I co-founded a SaaS company called Pro Pet Software, building business management tools for the pet industry. That company is still operating today. We have a couple million end customers. And then 8 years ago, joined the team at Iversoft, where when I joined, we were a team of 6 or 7 building custom software for companies all over the world. Today, we're a team over 50, pushing past 8 figures, and have worked with some of the craziest brands on the planet, which has been absolutely amazing. So it's been a bit of my world.
Hence why I asked the question, right? It's like that childlike, back to that childlike state and that perspective and the possibility thinking. It's the abundance mindset, not the scarcity, right?
Yes.
And I feel like that's what you so beautifully exemplify in your story. I'm curious, now that we're talking about this incredible hero's journey and story, at what point along the way did you start to think about leadership? Did you start to see yourself as a leader and then start to really go on that journey? Right? And was that journey an external one or an internal one? I'm curious.
So for better or worse, I have always kind of viewed myself as a leader. And partially because I'm also somewhat inherently lazy. So it's always been my kind of default to try and find people way better and smarter than me and kind of motivate them to help me do the thing that we're trying to do. And so I look back, and it's actually really funny. When I was, I think, 11, in Pickering, I was part of a founding group that started a youth council to advise the city council and the mayor on youth activities that should be happening in the city. And literally was like writing reports and taking them to council. And like, I would have lunch with the mayor every 2 weeks and like, be like, here's what you need to be doing with the city to make our lives better. And I ended up doing that because I grew up in a house where it's like, you're not allowed to complain about something unless you're willing to do something about it. And I made the mistake of, I think, complaining that I was bored. And it was like, well, you either get to change this or be quiet. And so went down the path of like, okay, I guess I stand up and change it. And it was like 11-year-old me and a bunch of high school kids on this council reporting to city council being like, we need more dances and school ed sport drop-ins and whatever. And so from very early on, I've always had kind of a bit of an innate lean towards the leadership side of things. Even with Snow Currency, which was our first company, I started out more on the sales facilitation side, but as we got further in, there were other people that were way better at the logistics management and the like programming side of it. So I played coordinator between eBay and PayPal and customers and just making sure everything kind of moved where it needed to. And I remember vividly a conversation at the beginning of Rocket Owl where originally there were 6 founders at the table there, and I think I was the youngest by about 15 years. And a number of the other co-founders had been like CEOs of public companies. They had scaled up like multi 8, 9-figure companies. And we were starting to discuss like who should have what role. And I remember having this just like crazy sense that like I don't know how to do anything other than CEO, and I think that's where I need to be. And I spoke up at the time, and that's what kind of put me into the CEO role at Rocket Owl and what led to the fundraising and the growth there. And I think at the time that came from a lot of like arrogance and ego. I'm just like, I have always run my own thing and I am just king of the universe. It's evolved a lot since then of really leaning into how do you connect with people? How do you motivate people? How do you find and retain and support incredible human beings? And I'm really, really, really proud of not only the kind of the growth that I've been able to go through, but like what we've been able to create at Iversoft over the past 8 years. I don't remember how much we touched on this last time we chatted, but we've always kind of prided ourselves on being a kind of very much people first culture and people first mentality. And it's allowed us to do some really innovative and cool things. When the pandemic first hit, I think 2 weeks before the pandemic officially hit, we went fully remote. And not just as a like, oh, let's do this temporarily and we'll figure it out. We went remote and said like, okay, this is going to be our norm. All of our investment goes to making this the most successful environment it can be. If we change in the future, we change in the future. But right now, this is it, and we're all in on it. And what was really interesting in this, that allowed us to start exploring different things we could do to build up our people and support people. And very early on in the pandemic, if you guys all remember, there was all kinds of insanity about like, when can you go out? Kids are at home. Kids aren't at home. Like there was just absolute chaos. And we started looking at like, okay, we have a team of really, really, really smart people who are really stressed out. And a lot of the stress is coming from trying to manage schedules and timing. What if we changed the work side of that? What if we just kind of flipped that? And so we piloted a program for 2 months where we went to a compressed 4-day work week. So what that meant was you had complete flexibility on how and when the majority of your hours got done. We changed our corporate core hours to 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern. So that 5-hour window was the window in which we would book client meetings and internal meetings. And so you had to be available to be booked in meetings with other people during that window. Outside of that, Monday to Friday, the schedule was yours. And we did not allow any bookings on Fridays. So Monday to Thursday, 10 to 3 was the core hours, and nothing could be booked on Fridays. And we immediately saw massive increase in productivity, in overall happiness, and buy-in from the team because we were creating an environment where parents were like, I can help deal with my kids in the morning, get them situated, then I can jump into work, and then I can take a break if I need to at the end of the day at 3:00 to go deal with post-school stuff, get them situated, get them handled, and then jump in for a couple hours after that. And what was really cool was like after that 2-month experiment, we made it kind of core policy and wrote it into the company of like, this is just how we operate. And I feel like a lot of that shift embodies how we approach leadership is like, be willing to experiment, be willing to challenge norms and traditional assumptions, and be willing to just experiment and figure it out. Like a lot of people are like, oh, you can't possibly, you're a services business. You couldn't possibly do a 4-day work week. Like all of your clients will fire you. Realistically, we talk to all of our clients and like, look, the world is crazy. You hire us to have the best possible people on the planet. This is going to let me hire higher caliber people than anyone else in the industry. I can get you better people than any of our competitors, and you'll have rock star teams that are happy to work on your projects. The trade-off is you can't book us on a Friday. Believe it or not, 100% of our clients bought it. So like that's been, yeah, that's kind of been a bit of the leadership journey. Sorry, I realized that was a long answer to your question, but
it was a great answer. And Graeme, I'm just curious about your own journey as a leader. Like you mentioned, at 21, there was this element of like, and I mean, I'm sure all 21-year-olds were like this. I was totally like this too, where it is like you feel like you're amazing and incredible. And then as you go through life, life kicks you in the teeth a few times and you have
Yep.
some adjustment. So, what was your growth like as a leader?
Humbling. I think um, I was very privileged at the beginning of Iversoft, or at the beginning of Rocket Owl, to be surrounded by a very, very experienced co-founding team, and fortunately leaned into a lot of the mentorship that I could, from like learning from our COO and our CFO, and learning as much as I could to kind of check myself and recognize where my strengths and skills were, which was largely on the like fundraising and sales side of the world, and less on the day-to-day operations. At the same time, the first couple of years, there was a heavy component of solid, we'll call it ego to be nice. Um, I'm kind of, I haven't done anything wrong. I can't miss. And the reality is, Rocket Owl grew to a team of about 25. We were growing super aggressively. We were raising aggressively. And about 3.5 years in, we closed a Series A that was going to unlock our next kind of phase of growth. And unfortunately, had a really, really bad experience with the fundraising process there, where we closed the deal. And when the first tranche of money was supposed to come in, it didn't. We talked to the investment group and said, like, look, what's going on? They said, don't worry, like, we'll double up the next payment. It's supposed to be a 4-payment tranche. And so we said, okay, like, a bunch of us put personal money in. We stretched everything we possibly could. And we're like, all right, we push to the next tranche and we keep going and we go crazy. And second tranche came and the group said, look, we've reevaluated our position and we're not gonna put money in. And at that point, we had some staff that had voluntarily gone off salary for a month or 2 months, and letting go of 20 people to wind down the business to a skeleton crew, and then try and find an acquirer and get as soft a landing as I could for everyone, was probably one of the most humbling and identity redirecting experiences of my life. And I had very much at that time, my entire core identity of who I was Rocket Owl, was that company, was everything I had done there. And I was so bought into this philosophy, like the Silicon Valley, like, you go hard and you either blow up against the wall or you go to the moon, which is a really cool startup philosophy when you go to the moon. Nobody really talks about what happens when you blow up in a million pieces against the wall. So we had the like slight blow up against the wall. And I think that was one of the most transformational experiences for me from a leadership perspective, of truly understanding the impact your decisions can have as an entrepreneur on families, on mortgage payments, on human beings, and that ecosystem, and on investors, facing people that had bet on you and said, like, we believe in you, we believe in your direction, and coming to the table and be like, I fucked up. Like, I don't have an answer for this. And we overcommitted here. I think at the time was devastating and incredibly challenging to work through. But looking back, I think was, I'm not going to say necessary, but was a good thing for me to go through, to humble a little bit and put me back into the field with a little bit more humility in how I approach things and how I make decisions from a leadership perspective.
After that sort of big blow up, and like you mentioned, a key phrase is like, Rocket Owl was you. And I've experienced this as well, as like, work is you. And if you're not succeeding at work, basically, who are you?
Yep.
How did you start to piece together who you were outside of work?
I don't know that I've got a great answer for you. I did a real. I was very fortunate to have some incredible friends around me at the time. One of whom that kind of bought the tech from Rocket Owl, brought me in to be CEO of the investment fund, and kind of because I had also taken a month or two in between, or 2 or 3 months in between, to literally just kind of crawl up in a ball and hide, be like, I don't know what to do with my life. I fucked up. I'm done. I'm 24. Everything's over. I should just opt out. And gave me purpose again to focus on, an opportunity to kind of take everything I'd learned and everything I'd grown from and refocus that. And I think to this day, I still tie a lot of my identity into what I build and how I build and the people around that. I think I've done a better job now separating the personal from any one company. I'm still very much motivated and driven by the fact that I want to have significant impact on a lot of people. I want to be able to create incredible opportunities in the world. I want to be able to fund cool companies. I want to be able to fund cool entrepreneurs, and I want to build an environment that people are excited to come and work in and grow in. And I think if all of that blew up tomorrow, it would still be a pretty significant hit to the personal identity side of things. But I think if any one piece of that fell apart, it would not be the same impact as it was when it was like Rocket Owl is everything. But I also, during the Rocket Owl time, I was doing 60 an hour days, 6.5 days a week, every week for like 3.5, 4 years, right? Like that was my entire life. There was no balance. And whereas like we've moved to a way, way better balance now, and recognizing as well, like the quality I output and the quality of what I can do and deliver on a 37.5 hour week or a 40-hour week far exceeds what I do on a 70-hour week. Like it's just not even comparable. Yeah, there's more hours on the one, but the quality of decisions, the quality of output sucks if you do it for any significant amount of time. It's not to say there aren't busy weeks every now and then where you can do high output for a week, but if that is the trend line for you, I really struggle with that. And I don't actively try and not create environments in companies that we're involved in where that is the expectation, because I've seen it firsthand too at Iversoft, where like the more flexibility and the more space we've given people, the higher quality output becomes, and the faster projects move and the better decisions get made versus the people that are stressed out doing 12-hour days. Like it's not comparable. And so I really struggle when I talk to execs, and unfortunately some of the older leadership teams that I know in different spaces, of just like, you need to get your head around the fact that butts in chairs for hours is not a like one-to-one with output and results. Like especially in intellectually based industries where it's like software development or design or UX, like it's not a pure hours grind. It really, really isn't.
Yeah, I think this is what we're exploring on this show, Graeme, is like, how do we break that perpetual pattern of self-sabotage? This is where we started the show today, in fact, right? Is like, nothing good be happening at the end of Q4 if you're burnt out. Take time to recover before Q1 begins, right? Because if the leader at the helm is coming from a space and place of scarcity, that's fight or flight, folks.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying. Ain't no high quality decisions going to be happening from that brain. And when the leader is in that type of deficit and that type of tailspin, the tragic part of this cycle that we see way too much here in 2024 is that we tend to try to control our people even more because of how insecure we're feeling on the inside of our nervous systems, right? And so when we're trying to control our people more, that doesn't awaken the power within. That makes them want to disengage. That makes them burn out, right? And so all of that is such a dangerous, slippery slope. And this is what I want to talk about right now, that I see way too many of my leaders on because of all of that which is going on around them contextually in an economically uncertain, global condition. Is that is often, they don't even realize that they're doing it, is the most tragic part.
Yeah.
people are burning out left, right, and center, but they don't understand where that locus of control begins, where that agency lies. You want to say a little bit about this piece in terms of how we really get through to those leaders out there who are at the helm, trying to navigate all of this uncertainty, but not whilst being in scarcity? How do we help set them up to be resilient in all of this pressure?
I think personally, a lot of that comes down to creating the space for that to happen. And what I mean by that is I meet a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think we've even had some conversations on this, where the first answer to overcapacity or like chaos in the business is people from the leadership team roll up their sleeves, dive in, and start doing the work. And when you're in the weeds, you cannot make objective, meaningful decisions on how to impact the direction of the business. You cannot properly assess processes that are working or not working. It's important to have a finger on the pulse of what's happening in your company, but it is important not to be in the weeds of the delivery of it. And so many founders get stuck with this of like, oh, I can do it, so I will, and I do it faster than my team, so I'll just get in there and I'll do it better, and all of these things. And the reality is, if you combine that with some uncertainty, there is no space to have a conversation about abundance or opportunity or anything, because they're just like, I need to survive. I have 7 deliverables. I got to get through it. My team is waiting on me. I'm the bottleneck. And that's where, for me at least, you go through a bit of the process with leadership team of starting to audit time and like, where is your time in a day going? Where are you spending your energy? How high value are those tasks? What tools have you put in place? What material exists to train and hand that content off to somebody? Where are you creating systems that you are absolutely instrumental? And how do we stop that from happening? Because until you can pull somebody out of the weeds a little bit, and until you can kind of create space for them to have the conversation, there is no conversation to have about anything else, because they are drowning in their day to day. And like, I've literally lived this with our leadership team, where we've had gaps in our org structure or gaps in our process, where we've just had senior people that are like fundamental to the delivery of stuff, and the decisions they make from a strategic perspective on direction of the company or how we revamp process. Like, you can have a conversation with one of your smartest people if they are in the weeds of delivery every day, and you're like, what if we just blew up this like process and changed it, and like, what if we made it better? And they're going to lose their mind on you of like, that, do you have any idea how much work that will cause me, and like how bad that's going to be for my day? Whereas like, put in the systems where they're not in it every day and they can actually take an objective view of it, it's a completely different conversation. So for me, when you're having leaders that are having a hard time having those conversations, I approach it from a time audit standpoint first of like, okay, I get you're overwhelmed. I get things feel like chaos. I get things are like really stressful. Let's start looking 15-minute increments every day for 2 weeks. Where's all of your time actually going? And start to have really candid conversations about how valuable is that time. Are you the right person that should have been doing it? If email, if messaging, if coordinating is a big component of any leader's time, immediately hire an executive assistant and get their inbox out of their control. If delivery of anything is the other thing that's eating stuff up, get them to start recording every delivery piece they do. Like, put your phone beside you and literally just record your face and your screen, pull up Loom, whatever you need to do, just start recording it. So you build a bank of here's how you're going to train somebody else to do it for you, to start putting in the process to create space so that you can have meaningful strategic conversations. But at least, and I'm curious to hear from your perspectives, but what I've seen is, until you can fix the operational piece of like, people are drowning in the day to day, it is so hard to have a mindset conversation with anyone, because they're just like, fuck off. I am trying to survive. And you don't understand how hard it is to survive and how much depends on me and how stressful this is. Yeah, I get it. But yeah, do you guys see similar
That's
things in your
why
world?
we're talking about the power of running off the side of a damn cliff, right? You got to be so present in that moment of choice that it will take you off of the tomorrows and the yesterdays and the tomorrows and the hamster wheel that we were talking about at the start, right? And I think that's what we're suggesting in this conversation too, is if you don't create the space for the change isn't possible. 95 to 97% of your choices all day long, boom, 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 happening on autopilot. You don't even recognize that you're making them. But when you're stressed, you better believe that's even more. That is the essence of survival. Right? And so, yeah, I think that this is for sure, whenever we're asked as leadership coaches, right, Rob, this is what we say. It's like, you got to start by making the space to even contemplate the changes that need to be made, right? And then you got to be prepared to protect that space. Little thing called boundaries need to start to get sprinkled in there, right? Because that's, again, the antithesis of what a drowning leader has empowered in their time energy relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's actually where what's interesting, and I've seen this very much in my own world, is like that's where the benefit of having a coach, having mentors, having advisors, having an outside voice, especially for CEOs or other very senior roles, that can kind of call you out on. I've seen a lot of people do really good at, like, they make the space. And it's like, awesome. We have space for strategic decision making. And then you talk to them next week and it's like, wait, where did all the space go? And they're like, oh, well, I had space. So now I booked these one-on-ones. I booked this other stuff. And it's like, the goal of creating the space was not to immediately fill it with other stuff. Like, the goal of creating the space was to protect the space to then be able to reinvest that time back in.
Yeah.
And you need someone to be able to point that out and call out, be like, you need to protect that. You need to be strong on that. And I think as CEOs, that's our job in our organizations, is to be able to be that voice for our teams if you see them doing that. And as coaches, that's part of the job of accountability, is like being able to, like, okay, good, we've created space. Here's what we intend to do with that space. And it's not just fill it with other stuff that should have been handed off anyway.
Yeah, for me, the big question I want folks to examine in their experience is, what benefit are you getting out of the busyness, or saying yes to everything, or maintaining the problem or the inefficiency that you have? There's a reason that you don't want to change. This is also from a leadership team aspect. Is there's a lot of organizations, and if you're trying to do cultural change, or you're trying to implement a new process that's better or make more money, like do these things, there's going to be resistance. And the reason is somebody benefits from the problem, so they don't want to change. And this could literally be something as like, well, I'm in charge of this software, so I don't want to get rid of it, because then what am I? All the way to something purely like a mindset, like a leader. Like, literally, we wrapped up a program in December, and one of my coachees said to me, the biggest thing I learned in this course was how to say no. And I was like, this win is
victory.
That's a superpower.
Such a huge win. Like, you don't even understand how big of a win this is. And it's like, he's like night and day happier. Like, he's saying yes to things that are getting him to his goals versus, oh yeah, I have 100 emails and I gotta do. And it's like, now we're moving the bench towards the KPIs and the deliverables that he has versus the chaos.
Rinse and repeat.
It's easy to feel busy, or it's easy to be busy. The goal is to be productive, and some people confuse the two.
Many people, in fact. Right? They don't see the busyness as the avoidance. They use the busyness as their badge of honor. It's the identity.
It's hustle culture.
We were just talking about, right? The identity piece, and why we feel like we're going to die if the work stops. It's because that clearly is how we maladaptively are seeking that external validation, right? To prove our worth. Our worth is our work. I know we got to wrap this up, but we see that a lot with our crowd, obviously.
I have another meeting in about 2 minutes. So unfortunately, unfortunately won't get to the legacy question. However, we'll get Graeme back to hit the big questions at a later date.
Awesome.
Graeme, for folks out there, so one is I've dropped your LinkedIn in the podcast notes, your Instagram in the podcast notes is just Graeme Barlow for both of those. And then if you want to check out Iversoft, it's just iversoft.ca. Is there anywhere else you want folks to find you or anything that you're
if you're
tell folks?
If you're interested in chatting coaching or advisory on any fronts, check out graemebarlow.com. We also host a series of dinners across the country for founders to connect people doing cool stuff. I think we've got Susan attending one in Toronto coming up. So if you're interested in that, hit me up. Let me know what cities you're in. I think we've currently got stuff planned in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Calgary. And so excited to connect with people across the country.
Awesome. So graemebarlow.com. I'll drop that in the podcast notes as well. And of course, hit subscribe to Leadership Launchpad Project wherever you're listening to this. And then for one-on-one or team leadership development, head on over to elitehighperformance.com for all of that. Susan, is there something you want to leave our folks with today?
Just real quick, I can hardly wait to get to the Founders Dinner with Graeme at the end of the month. So stay tuned for an update on that, because I know there's going to be lots of valuable insight and intel coming out of that exchange. But I'll hang out since you got a meeting to go to with Graeme, and I'll ask him the legacy question, and we'll put it in the Legacy League for all of you out there who don't know about the Legacy League. We'll be dropping information below the podcast in the notes, but we've got a whole locker room in there on legacy and where we like to interview our podcast guests for a little OT time. So yeah, come on over to the Legacy League and let's hear about Graeme's legacy factor.
Absolutely. Amazing. And for me, where I want folks to land is I have a quote from Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE, and he says, "Control your own destiny or someone else will." And this is you taking your power back as a leader of self and saying no to the right things and saying yes to the right things and organizing your day and your time. And this is also the fun things and jumping off a cliff. But these are the things that you can do that will lead you to that legacy that you want to leave on the world. So, Graeme, thank you so much for joining us on the Leadership Launchpad, and we're totally pumped to have you back.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Rob. Susan, this was awesome. So much fun.
Everybody. Everyone, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all next week.
Full circle. We ended with fun. See?
There you go.
I was gonna say.